Hi everybody and welcome to Tidalwave Studio. My name is Damiani and today I would like to share with you a complete mix decomposition of an extreme metal song. Let's dive in. Okay, the song we are looking at today is from a band called Witticism, and I got the multi-track as well as a demo to work on and to mix the song. So let's have a listen at the demo first. Okay, the first thing that hit me was the artificial quality of the drums. They have been programmed, but even if the drums are programmed, there are still some ways that you can give them a more natural character and not sound so robotic. Let's see what we did here. First of all, the bass drum. If you're playing double bass, your right foot and your left foot are going to sound different. So what I usually do is split up double bass patterns into a right and a left foot and give the right foot a little bit more attack, a little bit more volume, maybe a slightly different tuning than the left foot. Yeah, and the left foot obviously the opposite. And this results in a more natural feeling. Let's have a listen to the new bass drum. Yeah, I did all of the above, a little bit of tuning, a little bit of different intensity, and I didn't use completely dry samples. These are pretty roomy, so this also adds to the naturality of the drum set because everything is happening in a room and not just a close mic up in your face. Okay, next up the snare. When I'm programming snare drums, I usually stack different sounds on top of each other. Why do I do this? Well, first of all, I'm not just using the same sample all the time. So this means that I can vary from song to song, definitely from album to album. Just try and find a blend that fits the mood of the song. I'm going to show you the different textures that I used here and then the resulting final snare drum, and you can see that it has much more color and more texture than each one of the individual snares that I used. Yeah, as you can hear, they are completely different. There are songs with more attack and more room, less room, higher, lower. Yeah, and the blend is what I really like. It's like, as I always say, is like with cooking. You don't put a lot of one spice into a dish, but you put like a little bit of everything, and you can just sculpt the sound this way instead of just taking a sample and that's it. So this is the resulting snare. Now solo, this sounds pretty aggressive and a little bit saturated, and this is fine like this. I did this on purpose. I used like parallel compression and parallel multiband compression. The plugin I used here on the individual track is parallel particles from Waves, which is kind of multi-band parallel compression thing. And I really wanted to saturate the sound because this is pulling out even more of the room of the snare sound and giving it like an explosive character. This is only for the main hits of the drum. But when I'm dealing with blast beats or ghost notes, then I go differently. I try to leave the sounds more natural, without so much compression, and definitely at lower velocities, and I usually choose a different blend of snares. Here there is a section in the song where there have been ghost notes programmed. Let's have a listen to this and then I show you how I did the ghost notes. yeah, when programming drums, it really helps to know what a real drum set sounds like, especially different velocities, how it feels if ghost notes are played. And in this case, I just used like a pretty soft sound at very low velocity. I just used two different sounds to layer them, and that was all that I felt was needed to just put those ghost notes in. Okay, the next thing we are going to look at are the toms. I feel with programmed drums, the toms often really show that they are programmed. The thing is, when you play toms on a sampler, it's like it's firing a hit, and then when the second hit is coming, the first one is shut off, and it really feels like on off, like really like machine gunny. And I was thinking a lot about this years ago, and I thought the best way maybe to program drums is to record actual hits that are playing one after another, where one rings into another in a natural way, then just chop it up and rebuild drum fills with it. So this is what I usually record when I'm recording drums, when I'm taking samples. Listen to this. So this was a set that I was recording in a session and some samples that I took. Now what I have is hits that are ringing one into another in a very natural way, and I have all the different velocity steps that I need. So I just go in, chop them up the way you can see it here, and I just rearrange them and build tom fills with it. Let's have a look at one part where the floor tom is playing a groove, where I just used like the different elements of this little sequence that we just listened to and how natural it's sounding. That doesn't sound too unnatural, does it? So I really love it to do this way. It's pretty tedious because you cannot just click in MIDI notes. You really have to choose, like, is this going to be a loud hit, a soft hit and stuff. But I think it's well worth it because it sounds so much more natural. So maybe that's something you want to try out for yourself. Okay, now to all the overhead and hi-hat and ride stuff. I don't put everything on one overhead track the way it would be in a real recording scenario. I think if we are programming everything, let's take advantage of being able to like separate everything and work on every element individually. So I go in and like program a hi-hat, put it on a separate track, program a ride, put it on a separate track, etc. So let's have a look at, for example, this splash here. Here I have a splash, and I was able to put like a little bit of saturation, distortion on it to make it ring a little bit longer, which would not be possible if everything was on one track. Without all the extra processing, it's just so tiny, and I wanted to beef it up a little bit and make it more present, and it's so much easier if you have it isolated than if it was just in a mix of overheads or in one drum MIDI track. Because often when I get programmed drums, you get handed out the tracks the way they would have been recorded. So if I have the overheads, you have all the cymbals and all the shells that are like bleeding into those overheads, which is something when you record a real drum set, you just have to deal with it. But if we are already programming it, why not take advantage of being able to separate everything? Okay, last but not least, my secret sauce, well, not just mine, but for many engineers, is compression, and especially parallel compression on the drums. Let me show you what the drum sound is isolated with the parallel compression and without, and see for yourself what the difference is. Yeah, compression, especially parallel compression, I really love it because you can just add density and size and grit and all the good stuff that you want on the drums to be able to poke through the mix when all the guitars and everything is playing at the same time. If you don't add any of this, then your drums will just disappear somewhere in the mix. But this just gives them more power in the mix. Okay, the compressor I used here is just a plugin emulation of the API 2500, and the main setting that you have to have a look at is the attack time of the compressor. Depending on what you want to achieve with this parallel compression bus, you have to set your attack time accordingly. If you want more room or more size out of your parallel bus, then you have to set a very quick attack time, because it's going to eat away all the initial transients and open up all the sustain. If you want more snap, then you have to go with a little bit slower attack time, so it lets slip the transients through first, and then it's going to work on the sustain. Let's have a listen at how I set it now, and then I'm going to go to a very fast attack, and you will see the drums disappear to the back. And when I'm going to go up to 30 milliseconds, so a very slow attack, you see how the drums are coming up in front and sound less compressed. So this is the main setting on your parallel drum compression bus that you have to have a look at, because it really defines what you're getting out of your parallel compression. That's about it for the drums. It's nothing really spectacular. Here it was really, more focus on getting a pretty natural drum sound in the programmed scenario. Okay, next let's have a look at the bass and see what we did here. Okay, this is what the bass DI signal sounds dry without any processing. Yeah, what you would expect from a bass DI signal. Now what we have to do is add some character, add some weight, add some density, some saturation, especially in the context of a metal song, really to get it to be thick and punchy and really be able to cut through all the guitars and all the other stuff. So let's see what we did here. I split it up onto 2 tracks and used different EQs, saturation, amp simulations, and just played around with it until I liked the mix of everything. There is no real go-to way. If you have an amp that you really like and it always works fine, for me it's like always a little bit of trial and error and put it in the context of the song and just see what I can do to it until it just feels right. It's all a thing of going by feeling and playing around until it really feels nice and until it has all the elements you want out of it. Let's see what I did here. I start with the first track. I think I started with the simulation of an amp pack. Some compression. Some pre-EQing just to remove a little bit of those annoying mids. Some pre-compression going into the amp. Some saturation. Here I mainly saturated the mids. I left the bass alone so that this stays tight, and only saturating or distorting the mids and the highs. Boosting a little bit of this area around, usually around 7, 8, 900, 1000 kilohertz is an area that really lets the bass shine and poke through. This is something that you will hear when you listen on a phone or on a small laptop speaker. That's an area that really gives the bass a lot of presence. And then I'm not shy with limiting on bass just to try and make it and squeeze it tight so that it's not jumping around, but really like having one velocity and really one energy throughout the song. Then I have a second track where I also used a dirty amp simulation. And again, some limiting. Then everything combined on one, let's say, master fader for those two tracks combined. And again, adding a little bit of EQ, just cleaning up or calming down a little bit the low end here. A little bit of compression or a lot of compression, just slamming it, and a little bit of limiting still at the end. So basically, yeah, adding character, adding some distortion, especially in metal, you really want like a lot of character in the bass, and then compressing, limiting, really so that it's like a real power ball, the whole bass, and not like something that is flopping around. Okay, next up, the guitars. I was given amped signals that had plugins on them, and I was also fortunately given the DI tracks. So the amp that has been used was okay, but first of all, it was 2 times the same, left and right the same amp, which for me is a big no-no. I want to have different sounds on either side of the mix, because if you use 2 times the same sound, the two guitars will somehow appear to be in the center or almost in the center, because they share so much common information that it will end up in the phantom center of your mix. But if you use 2 different sounds on each side, then you really will get some spread. So you will hear one guitar here, instead of 2 gathering in the center. What I did here was I doubled each DI track. So I used 2 different amps on one side, 2 different amps on the other side, just to get, like with the snare, more different textures that just add up and enrichen the whole thing, instead of just using one, which is nice basically, but more is more. You get just more different textures. It's a richer sound. And yeah, it worked really nice here. Let's listen to what they sound like. I basically treated every individual guitar track in the same way. So I put the DI into an amp. So here I use like a rectifier thing. Here's a completely different amp, and so on. So I have like 4 different amps for 2 guitars. And then I used some soothe, which is basically like a dynamic EQ, to just tame some build-ups that happen on guitars. For example, if you play palm mutes, like you often have a little build-up in the lows, which can really be annoying regarding the bass because it's getting boomy. So just controlling the overall frequency response of the guitars, removing a little bit of harshness when it's exceeding a certain threshold, and removing a little bit of boominess when it's also exceeding a certain threshold. And dynamic EQs like this soothe, for example, they come in really handy for this. And then some EQing. What I often like to do is on like distorted guitars is removing the high end completely, because it's very fizzy. It sounds nice on its own, but it's taking away space for the cymbals. Let's listen to before and after of this. So this is without EQ. And now with the EQ. If I solo that high end, that's just noise. It's really not helping anything at all. A normal speaker of a guitar amp doesn't have any useful information above, let's say, 5-6K or something like this. So there's really just hiss and noise. And the problem is that it's going to mask your cymbals. So it can be really handy to just cut off those extreme highs and cleaning up all the high end to leave space for the cymbals. So they sound much clearer and you don't have to crank them as much because there's just space free for them. And I did a similar thing for all the guitars here. It's I think I have almost the same EQ, removing some boxiness and all the high end and all the very low stuff. So because there's really nothing useful going on there. Removing some of the boxiness in the center can also be a really good idea because the center frequencies, let's say around 300, 400, 500 hertz, they tend to build up over the tracks. The bass has these frequencies, the snare has these frequencies, the guitars have these frequencies, the voice has these frequencies. So this area of the frequency spectrum is shared by many or almost all the elements of a mix. Every instrument has something there. So you tend to get up a real build up here. So it's good practice to carve out a little bit in certain instruments. For example, in the guitars, give them a little smiley curve just to keep this center area of the frequency range clean and not like honky all the time. I grouped these 4 individual guitars into one folder and added some more processing on top. So for the sum of these 4 guitars. What I used here was, CLA guitars. I kind of like what it does. It opens up the sound and gives it more presence a little bit. Let me bypass it and engage it for a second. Yeah, it's just opening up the sound a little bit, giving it a little bit more presence, which I really liked in this case. At the end, on electric guitars, just like on the bass, in this extreme metal scenario, I really like to put a limiter at the end and shave off all excessive movement of that guitar. I want it really to be like an audio sausage, which always has the same intensity and is really like solid. So my preferred limiter is the good old L2 by Waves. It's not very aggressive here, but it really calms down the whole signal a bit and gives it a consistency that I really like. Okay, next let's have a look at the vocals. I always have a lot of fun playing around with like aggressive vocals. You can really mangle them in a nice way to give them grit and character. Just a little bit like with the bass. If you don't put anything on, often it's boring and it's lacking intensity, but you really want the vocals to cut through. So let's see what we did with the vocals. Okay, I bypassed all processing for a second and then we are going step by step and see what has been done. This is the raw track.
In the profound of human spirit, we quest for signs.
It is okay, it has some grain and it has some attitude, but it's too flat for what we need. We need more excitement, we need more in-your-faceness. So what can we do? First of all, I boosted some high mids and removed all the rumble in the lows. So this is before and after.
In the profound of human spirit, we quest for signs.
Just a little bit more presence. Okay. Next, I used a split EQ. This is a nice EQ that can handle attacks and sustains individually. So I can really boost attack in certain areas or maybe remove sustain in certain areas. And this is exactly what I did here. I was feeling that it was a little bit too muddy, the vocal, but I didn't want to cut out the mid-range completely because you need something to work with. But I find that split EQ really does a nice job in just keeping like the attack in certain areas, but you just remove the longer aspects of the sound. So demuddying without actually really removing that frequency range completely.
In the profound of human spirit, we quest for signs.
It is very subtle, but it's really effective, especially later if I'm going to add like saturation and everything. If I wouldn't remove a little bit of that mid-range, it would really clutter up everything. Next, some soothe.
In the profound of human spirit.
There was a lot of build-up again. Where is this? Around 350 hertz. I already mentioned it before. Everything is happening in that range. And it's good to have like a consistency intensity-wise in that area so that it's not like jumping around and muddying up everything in an unpleasant way in that area. Next, some saturation. Without.
In the profound of human spirit.
And with.
In the profound of human spirit.
Still subtle, but all these little steps add up until you really get like a powerball of vocals. So what I did here is like especially distorting, where is the crossover, 500 hertz. So like from the mid-range up to the top, adding more sparkle and a little bit more presence to the vocals by saturating and compressing a little bit everything above 500 hertz. I cut off everything below like 80 hertz. There's not a lot useful going on down there, and I left the low end of the voice, so the fundamental range alone. Some slight de-essing.
In the profound of human spirit.
Although I must add that I already manually put down all the S's and took care of all the consonants, because one thing that many singers really share is like putting too much air on the consonants. So for example, a T is becoming a T. It's almost becoming a T, Z, Z, E, instead of just being a T. They are too long, they have too much air, they are too loud. And when you start applying compression or saturation and all that stuff, they are really getting terribly annoying. So what you really have to do is have a look at them, and maybe before you go into compression, removing energy from those consonants by just making them softer. Sometimes I go in with spectral editing and just removing some whistles out of S's and removing some low end out of plosives like P's and T's and stuff like this. And just taking care of leveling out all those consonants before even hitting all these plugins. And then when I'm done with this, going through all that again in a later stage and just leveling, automating all those consonants so that you can make the voice really loud without all those consonants being really annoying. Because that's the one thing I often hear is the voice is either feels annoyingly loud, but often it's just the consonants. It's like t, t, k, all this stuff that's really like spitting at you, but doesn't have like real voice information, if you know what I mean. You need the vowels to be present, and those give you the volume, and all the consonants to be tamed a little bit. Or the other thing is that somebody that's mixing and not taking care of it thinks, the voice is too loud, it's annoying me, I'm pulling it down. But then you cannot hear the words anymore because it's too soft. But in fact, it's really like only the consonants that are really high and the vowels are too soft. You need to take care of that relationship between consonants and vowels, put them in the right ratio, and then you can really put the whole voice really in front. So after the de-esser, I have like very severe limiter. I really love to do this on scream vocals, really shave them off completely.
In the profound of human spirit, we quest for signs, ancient forces in a tour.
Now we start getting really like a real character. It's not so flat anymore. It's like a little bit of distortion, a little bit of limiting, a little bit of saturation, just enhancing what we liked in the voice. So the grit, the grain, and just removing a little bit the unwanted. So the all the too tonal stuff, the too lower mid-rangey stuff that risks of just cluttering up everything instead of just pulling the voice up in front. I really like to commit all these plugins into a new track, which means that I don't want to have the computer to have to calculate all these million plugins all the time. When I have a setting that I like, there are like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 plugins on a track, then I say, okay, commit these, so bake that information into the audio and put it on a new track, so I don't have like all these plugins open all the time. It frees my mind, it frees the computer from having to work too much, and yeah, I just like it that way. And another thing is that, for example, for voice, if I have all that saturation and compression and all that stuff already baked into the audio file, it's much easier for me to go and clip gain some S's down instead of having to use automation. I just like to do this right in the track. So like cutting or moving or editing, putting stuff up and down, I just can cut into like a finished process track. I like to do it that way. Let's have a look at what I put on reverb and effect-wise on these vocals.
In the profound of human spirit, we quest for signs.
I always love to work with many different types of effects. I just don't just put one reverb on, because oftentimes what you get is it's very obvious in the mix. You need quite a bit to cut through all the guitars and all that stuff. And if you just use one reverb, it's going to be very obvious and it's always going to feel like it is too much. Although, yeah, you probably would need even more to really get like a nice atmosphere. So it's really hard to get this dialed in if you just use one effect. So instead of what you can try, and what I do all the time and works well for me, is use an array of different effects. What I use here is I have an echo, a big hall, a church hall, like a special shimmery hall, a kind of funky stereo delay, a quarter delay, a room sound, a stereo widener, a dotted eighth delay, a normal eighth delay, another reverb, a short room. And all this is like spices in the kitchen. Salt, pepper, cinnamon, some herbs and whatever. And you just put a little bit of everything in just to taste. And it just sounds somewhat more natural or less obvious. And it's easier to dial in for me instead of just using one old reverb. So here we have like, combination of, I can bypass those for a second and show you what they sound like.
In the profound of you.
This is just a short room, then some larger room.
In the profound of.
With a longer tail, then an eighth delay.
In the profound.
Timed to the song. The good thing with delays is those repetitions, they hide somewhat between the drum hits, between the strums of the guitars, so they are there and adding some atmosphere and some some spatial information to a dry signal without being there all the time. They hide in between the elements and are there but not so obvious and not like cluttering up everything all the time. Here's some dotted eighth.
In the profound of.
So you have like da 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 and da 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 da, like different rhythms, different textures that are related to the rhythm of the song, but all different, and they just merge together. It's always basically the same thing. It's like with the snares, different textures. If you have one, it's this. If you have two, it's starting to get denser and more present without being here, but it's you know what I mean? It's like, yeah, just thicker and richer sound than just using one. Here's some widening.
In the profound of you.
I love to use this. This is where is it? Doubler by Waves. What this does is it's detuning one side and tuning up the other side a little bit, so you have the center voice, and one side, the left, is going down a little bit, the right is going up a little bit, and some delay. And what it does is it's just giving you a sense of width that is really nice. It's just giving some size to a voice, for example, just making it a little bit more stereo. And if you don't overdo it, there is also no big problem with phase issues or something. It really works just well. Just make the voice a little bit larger than life. What else do we have? Some special stereo delay.
In the profound of.
And some quarter delay.
In the profound.
Yeah, this is a little bit longer. Yeah, just a blend of different textures so that the voice really melts nicely into the music. Let's listen to the voice in context.
Profound of human spirit, request for signs, ancient forces intertwined, cosmic grand design.
Yeah, solo, you have the feeling that there is a lot going on, but in the music, it's not so much anymore. The guitars eat away from all these effects, and I don't want this kind of voice to be like overly wet. It's not what I feel is right for this song. But if I would remove everything that we added here, the voice would just be stuck to the speaker and not have any spatial sense at all. One nice thing to add on vocals, sometimes not too much, is like delay throws, which means like extra repetitions of a word, for example. Like in this case.
Request for signs,
yeah, sometimes it's nice to have some extra repetitions. Let's have a little look at backing vocals. You have certainly heard of like doubling the vocals to make them thicker and stuff. I like to use tripling vocals. So it's not like you have one voice and then you double it and you stick both into the center, but you take one and then you triple them. So you add like two other versions, two different takes, and just add them to the sides just to make either a complete track or some words larger and give them more size and more importance. For example, in a chorus, if you want the voice to suddenly become bigger, that's a good practice. So you have like your main voice and then you're adding backing vocals that are hardly panned left and right, and you just add them until you feel the voice getting a little bit bigger. Or sometimes you want to put some accents on different words and then you just add in those triples and just pronounce and give a different texture to these parts. Let's have a look at some of those.
We cast the void. We stand alone.
So it is subtle, but it has an effect. It doesn't always have to be like super loud, but it's always nice to have some ear candy. You have the voice in the center all the time, and then suddenly it's getting a little bit larger, and then it's going back. So to add some meaning to certain words or just, open up certain sections. That's pretty much it regarding the voice. My biggest advice would be don't be too shy with processing on extreme vocals. Just go crazy with it. Try whatever you like, and saturation, distortion, limiting, compression, all the good stuff, just to try and enhance what you like about it. Most of the time it will be grit and aggression and attitude, and maybe some EQing to remove some unwanted stuff, maybe some rumble or some boominess or something. And EQ a little bit of presence out so that it really that the voice really shines. Just go crazy with it. It's not like with a normally soft, clean sung voice that you try to let it sound as natural as possible. Here it's like it can be really dirty, and it somehow needs to be dirty to cut through a mix. I want to share a little trick to make some space in the guitars for the vocals, to really help the vocals cut through. In this case, it was pretty difficult to get the voice through because they are pretty low and they are right in the range of the guitars. So if the guitars are playing full range all the time, it's really hard for the vocals to cut through. But there is a little trick that you can use. What I did is I opened up an EQ on my guitar track, and the new FabFilter Pro Q4 has a feature called like spectral EQing, like spectral dynamics. What does that mean? That means that it has the ability to work like a little bit like this Soothe plugin, where it's analyzing the signal and just ducking down frequencies that are exceeding a certain threshold. And you can feed this spectral dynamic behavior with a signal coming from outside. So what I did is I was sending the voice to that EQ, so the EQ is listening to the voice and pulling down some frequencies only when the voice is singing, which means that the guitars are getting ducked down in certain frequency areas only when the voice is singing, and when the voice shuts up, it's going back to normal, which means that, yeah, the guitars are just getting quiet in certain areas when the singer is singing, making space for the voice, and just going back to normal when the singer stops singing. And by doing this so that it's only like EQing when the voice is really active, you really don't hear the guitar going down that much. It's just like changing places all the time, but it's a really great trick to make those two work well together. Let me show you this. So this is this EQ, and I set the sidechain input. I put the bass vocal to guitar sidechain, so there is some vocal coming into that EQ, and the EQ is listening to this voice for its dynamic behavior. And this is what happens. As you can see, it's only acting or pulling down certain frequency areas only when the voice is singing. And what is really cool about this, let me show you here what that's called. It's called spectral mode. What is really cool is it's not just pulling down that whole area, but it's listening to the voice. So if there are certain stronger aspects in the voice than in other parts, this section of the EQ is hearing, we have more 200 hertz, so I'm going to pull more out more 200 hertz. So it's really like counteracting exactly depending on the voice. It's really perfect to make some space. When we listen to the guitars on their own, let me exaggerate that just for a second, just to show the effect. If I'm really pulling down a lot, you can really hear. Obviously, we didn't use that amount of ducking down of frequencies, but that's amazing. It's really like, yeah, making the perfect space for the vocals. And you can use this also for other instruments. If, for example, a lead guitar doesn't have the power to cut through completely without it being too loud, just use this trick, send some of the lead guitar into that EQ, let the EQ listen to the lead guitar, and just pull itself down just exactly where needed to make some space. Brilliant, brilliant feature of that new FabFilter Pro Q4. Okay, we've had a look at the drums, the bass, the guitars, the vocals, and some of the effect stuff. Now I was still given some virtual instruments. There was some cello playing along, there were some horns and some trumpets in this song. Let me show you what I did to those instruments. In this section, for example, there are some spiccato cello playing along.
We walk between the sun and starless night of the void.
They are very subtle, but they add some texture and some rhythm to the song. But I had to tweak them a little bit to make them pop out a little bit more than they would have without. Let's listen to what they sounded raw. A nice sound, but rather classical, like out of a chamber orchestra, but I wanted them to have more grit. So I really love this plugin for this kind of application. It's from Waves. The engineer that helped develop it is Jeff Joseph Puig, and he has like his signature plugins. And this strings and keys plugins, I really love it to enhance pianos, to enhance strings, to enhance brass sections. It really like adds a ton of character. Let me bypass it and put it back in so that you hear what it does. Just pops out immediately. But it also has a tendency to have an excessive buildup of low end. So what I always have to do is like cut off the rumble. You can see here a lot of low end. And then I added some split EQ again to remove some low end that was in the cello that was just like felt more like a resonance. I didn't want to cut out that frequency, that low end completely, but just wanted to slim down the sustain a little bit. If you're listening on headphones or a good pair of speakers, you will hear this because there was like a low note that was just like booming around all the time, and that would have messed up the space for the bass and for the lower part of the guitars if I would have left in everything. But cut out everything would have made it thinner. So this split EQ type of EQ is really great because you can leave the attacks intact of certain frequency areas, but just remove the sustain part and just make some space in the time domain of a signal and not only in the frequency domain. It's brilliant. And then I wanted to give that sound a little bit more spread because the sound is nice, but it was sitting pretty much in the center. But I want to keep the center clean for bass, for the voice, and for the drum elements, for the snare and everything. And I want all this rhythm stuff spread out. So I used the so-called Haas effect, which means that if you delay one side, above 25 or 30 milliseconds, then it appears to come rather from one side than from the other. And this is what I did here. Bypass, and then I put it in. You can hear really how it's spreading out nicely. And by using a certain amount of delay, you won't get a lot of phase issues if you collapse it into mono, if you have to listen to the stuff in mono. So you really get a nice spread in a very, very easy way. Just delay the left side by 30 milliseconds and it seems like two cello playing on the outside rather than like a group of cello playing in the center. Now for the very for the end of the ingredients, I wanted to show you some things that I added to the song that have not been there before, because this arrangement was nice, but everything was happening in the mid-range. The guitars in the mid-range, the bass going into the mid-range, but I was missing some air in some parts. So let me show you one section and let me show you what I added in.
Upon the ruins of the sun, we built a throne of stone, a crown of thorns upon our heads.
I wanted to have like a shiny, glowy area in that section. So I added these in here. First of all, some tremolo violins that are playing very high. And then for a little gloomy touch, I added like a violin cluster. And to me, little subtle elements like these, they are all the magic of cool mixes. It's just like you have a section and add something that has not been there before, something that has like a nice texture, just some ear candy, although you will not say, aha, violins over there, but there will be something and you will feel that there is something going on, just changing the mood ever so slightly, just opening up the space a little bit. I would never be shy with adding in like special elements just to give some sections like a special character. Okay, for the very last, I want to show you what I have been using on the main Mixbuss. So all the processing that has been going on the sum of all these individual elements. And I always try to mix as if there were no mastering, which means that I'm not relying on a later stage in the mixing process or in the mastering process to give a song loudness and compactness. I want to have all these ingredients from the very first minute I start working on a track. So I always start with having a lot of stuff on my Mixbuss. So basically where every individual element ends up and gets added together to the final stereo track, I want to have all that processing from the very start, which means some EQing, some compression, some limiting, some clipping, all that stuff. This has a couple of advantages to me, at least. First of which is, if you have like a general treatment like compression and EQing and like saturation and some kind of glue to everything, you don't need as much on individual tracks. You don't need to compress every individual element, not necessarily. Second thing is that you don't have to rely on a later stage to get loudness. You will get a loud mix just by working into this chain of loud and compact making engines, if you want. Because if you mixing very, let's say, dynamically, and then at the end you say, okay, and now I'm going to make it loud, what often happens, and maybe you will recognize something in there, is like your snare gets lost, your transients, your hits, your attacks get lost. It's really like, it was so punchy and was so nice, and then you started limiting, and then all that punch and all that life gets just sucked out. Sounds maybe familiar to you. By working like this top-down method, like having this general treatment on top and then working into that, this cannot happen because you will counteract any limiting, any clipping, any compression by just working into it. You will hear that, oh, my snare is getting a little bit too soft, but you would just put it louder in the first place, or maybe compress it in a different way, or limit or clip or whatever, or choose a different sound in the first place, because you're instantly going to hear what's going to happen. It's not going to be a surprise for later. So that's a big advantage to me. And in the end, when you're done with your mix, with the final automation, your song is ready. You could still have another mastering stage where you just adjust like the tiniest things, or a mastering engineer is going to adjust tiny things, or maybe like from one song to another, maybe adjust a little bit of volume. But to be honest, by working with this method, I have, if I'm mixing 10 songs, I can put them together and they will just line up fine. There will be no big jump in volume. There will be no big jump in intensity or anything. They will just match perfectly fine because I worked into this chain of plugins and gear, and it's just compacting my stuff, and I'm listening always at the same volume here at the studio. It's always the same volume, and so used to that volume. So I don't even look at meters or LOFs or dB or whatever. I don't look at anything at all. I just feel it when the mix is ready. It's just a matter of getting used to working into the chain, working until it just feels like the right intensity. And then when I want to look at meters, I will see that they end up all pretty much in a similar spot, depending on the music genre, of course. And no need for extra loudness mastering or anything of this. Just do it from the start and you will end up at the exact right place. Let me walk you quickly through what I have on the Mixbuss and what I really rely on to get this dense and compact sound. First is a little EQ that most of the time is just there just in case I need something. In this case, it did nothing. I roll off the very, very, very lows, like from 26 hertz down, because there is really just nothing useful. But that's my default setting when I open the EQ, but in this session, it did nothing. Next is, this is a hardware insert. I have my rack full of analog gear here that I always use for mixing. And I have a pair of germanium compressors, a pair of germanium, Chandler germanium EQs, and an API 2500 that every element is just doing a tiny little bit, a little bit of compression, a little bit of EQing, a little bit of compression. I have like many compressors on the master bus, and each and every compressor is just doing like 0.5 dB of gain reduction, something like this. But they're adding character, they're adding harmonics, overtones, like saturation. Every good piece of equipment just adds a little bit of character and texture. So I go through a complete chain of, if I count everything, is like 1, 2, 3, 4 EQs, and let's say 3 pairs of compressors, which seems like insanely a lot. But as I said, every element is just doing a tiny little bit, instead of having one compressor having to do all the heavy lifting, because then you will hear some pumping. If one compressor has to do like, I don't know, 6 dB of gain reduction, you will hear it. Every bass drum hit will trigger everything, and it will just dance around all the time, which is fine when you want it. But most of the time you want just density and loudness without having the obvious feeling of, it's pumping up and down because one compressor is doing everything. Just give this a shot. Many serial compression instances doing a little bit at a time, different textures, different settings. This works wonders for me. As for EQing, it's I have like a general opening up of a mix. What I usually do is like adding a little bit of 110 hertz to just solidify the basic fundamental range where many instruments sit. The voice has fundamental there, the snare is fundamental there, the guitars have fundamentals there. I just like to have like 1 extra dB of thickness down there. Then on the other hand, I go and carve out ever so slightly in the, like, say 3, 4, 500 hertz range, and then opening up above this, like from 2, 3, 4K up to 20K, just doing a very slight, gentle smiley curve, cleaning up the mud in the low mids and giving some hi-fi feeling to the mix right away. Even when I'm feeding in like the raw tracks, they immediately have some, everything has some sheen and some like record ready feeling to it right from the first play. Okay, that is pretty much it. If anybody of you wants me to go into more detail of anything that I've shown, please let me know in the comments. If you like this little walkthrough, please leave a comment, leave a like, and subscribe for all the other content that I have on this channel, showing more techniques and yeah, everything that I've learned in the past 26 years and that I'm willing to share with all you guys out there. So I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video. Bye-bye.